welcome to our webinar entitled How to Recognize and Interpret Possible Signs of Grooming. I am your host, Nancy Kaufman, interim denominational minister for church safety for Mennonite Church USA. And tonight, I am so happy to be joined by Ross Erb, who's the Associate Director of the Collins Center in Virginia. And he has worked for a number of years on child safety, abuse issues, and grooming, obviously, and other topics related to that. Tonight's gathering is in a webinar format, so all attendees are muted and the chat is disabled. We will, however, be posting some links in the chat. We welcome your questions and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can at the end. Please feel free, though, to use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. Only the panelists, though, will be able to see your questions. We will also answer some of your pre-submitted questions as time allows at the end of this seminar. We do have a disclaimer just to remind you all that please be aware that this webinar will cover topics related to sexual abuse and grooming behaviors, which may trigger some things for some of you. Your well-being is important, so please feel free to step away or exit the webinar at any time. A recording will be available if you decide to join at a more suitable time later. And that recording is free on Safe Church website there. I would like to open with a prayer, and then I will turn it over to Ross to begin his presentation. And thank you, Ross, for being here. Let us pray. God, you care for all your creation, and you call all of us to be loving, caring, and to have integrity in all our behavior that reflects you. We do want to honor your creation. We desire to grow in our understanding of how to provide a safe space within our churches, our families, and our communities, so all can be able to encounter you and your ways. In Christ's name, amen. Ross?
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. I am going to share my screen so that people can see my slides. And all right. So I am going to be talking about grooming, and I'm going to start by saying that I don't like that word. Grooming is, to me, a rather confusing term. And in the field of sexual abuse prevention, grooming is a word that is kind of going out of vogue. And so really, I think what we will be doing is talking much more about manipulation. So if you joined us this evening hoping to talk about offenders, I want to disabuse you of that notion right away. You're going to be very disappointed. We are not going to be talking about offenders this evening. I think there are some webinars coming up that will address that. I am really, really interested in primary prevention. Primary prevention occurs before there has been an instance of child sexual abuse or maltreatment. If we wait till abuse has occurred and then respond, that's not prevention, clearly, because at that point you have a victim, you have someone who has inflicted harm. To do primary prevention requires us to create safe environments and be on the lookout and be prepared to step in to intervene if we see behavior that might lead to harm. Um, and that is a really, I don't think I can overemphasize that piece. So my goal for this evening is to equip you to be able to recognize behaviors that might lead to harm and give you some idea of how you might step forward to interrupt those behaviors. So again, despite the titles on the slides, uh, we're going to say recognizing possible manipulative behaviors and how we can move forward. So uh, if someone is thinking about um, sexually abusing a child, in almost all cases, it is not a simple find a child and sexually abuse them. There is a process that happens in advance of an offense occurring. Um, that process involves the individual who's seeking to harm a child, gaining the trust of the child, breaking down their defenses. Often, very often, in fact, it involves gaining the trust of the child's caregivers and the child's community. What we know about child sexual abuse is that the overwhelming majority of child sexual abuse is committed by someone who is known to the child and someone who is in that child's safe world. By child's safe world, I mean those areas of life where we all assume a child is going to be safe within their immediate family, within their extended family, at school, at church, at sporting events, at clubs that they may be involved in. We would all like to assume that those are safe places, and they should be safe places. But that is the place where a person who might want to harm a child is going to locate themselves so that they have access to the child. The same manipulative behaviors that a person might use on the child to gain their trust and break down their barriers are the behaviors that that person might use on the child's caretakers or their community. So the process is in sort of common vernacular grooming, we're going to say it is manipulation. I'm not going to sort of go over all of the stages of grooming. I want you to be aware of them. So 5 general stages: engagement, and then the sexual interaction, secrecy, promoting and encouraging the child to hold a secret, then the disclosure discovery phase, and then suppression. So uh, again, the engagement is that manipulation that occurs before harm has been perpetrated. The sexual interaction, that could be hands-on offenses, but it could also be digital offenses. So sextortion or uh, engaging the child and getting them to send uh, sexual abuse material. Used to be called child pornography. Now it's called child sexual abuse material, or CSAM. Um, that's where the harm occurs. And then secrecy, again, if a person is looking to harm a child, they have a very vested interest in making sure that that child is not going to tell anybody, or they're going to work to make sure that that child, if they do disclose, is not going to be believed. And they do that with a variety of techniques. The disclosure discovery phase, uh, quite honestly, may never happen. Uh, again, from what we know, many children, maybe most children, never disclose that they have been sexually abused. One particularly jarring statistic that I'm aware of is that the average age of a person first disclosing that they were sexually abused as a child is either 52 or 54 years old. So that people just hold that for such a long time. And then the suppression stage, if a child does make a disclosure or the abuse is discovered, very often the person who perpetrated the harm will work to make sure that that child recants, takes back their story, or um, is in some way silenced. Very often, it's not just the person who has initiated harm; it may be the child's family or community that tries to silence that disclosure um, because they want to protect the family. They want to protect if abuse happened in the context of uh, a sports club or a congregation. They want to protect the reputation of the club or congregation, and so they try to keep that disclosure from getting out more broadly. I think the piece that I want you to really be aware of in this whole process of manipulation is that if we really want to do primary prevention, which means stopping something before there is a victim, where do we have to intervene? It's at stage one, at the engagement stage. Waiting to stage two means that a child has already been harmed, and that's we really want to avoid that. A question that I often get when I'm talking about this manipulative process from people is, well, how do people like if someone is looking to harm a child, how do they know, you know, is there a manual out there somewhere that outlines the 5 steps? How do they figure this out? And again, that's where I think it's really helpful to think of this as manipulation. All of you were children at one point. Um, I would ask, did you ever manipulate your parents? I think the answer should universally be yes. Well, how did you know to do that? Was there a manual that you got in touch with? No, it was just something that kind of is inherent in us. We figure out ways to manipulate people. Certainly, parents manipulate their children. At least I did as a parent all the time because we want to encourage certain behaviors and discourage other behaviors. Um, so it is something that is sort of baked into us, that ability to manipulate. If we're looking at that stage one of the manipulative process in the engagement phase, there are some behaviors that are fairly can be pretty broad. And I will say that none of these behaviors have to occur, but very often some form of these behaviors will occur. So if a person is looking to develop a relationship with the child so that they can later harm the child, they will work to make that child feel special. And that will be by heaping praise on the child, finding things that they can say that oh, you are so much better at soccer than your friends, and just start because we all respond to praise. Um, we want to feel special. So that is a fairly easy hook for a child. Another thing that once a person is starting to make that relationship with a child, they very often will start to give special privileges to the child. Um, a person might be developing a relationship with an 11 or 12-year-old child and say, oh, you are so much more mature than your friends. And I think that um, we can make some exceptions for you because you are so mature. Uh, in fact, I know that you're more mature than your parents give you credit for. Your parents don't let you have a cell phone. That is terrible. I'm going to give you this cell phone, but you need to keep that a secret from your mom and dad or your caregivers. And you can use that to communicate with me. I'll pay for it, and it'll be our special way of communicating. Uh, if a person does that, has the person done something that's illegal? No. Is a person going to get in trouble for giving a child a cell phone? Um, the parents or the caregivers may be upset and angry and feel like, you know, they've been undercut in their parenting, and if they find out, they're going to um, talk about it. But the person is probably not going to necessarily be kicked out of the community or shunned from the family or anything like that. In that process, what the adult or the person who's getting ready to harm the child is doing is setting up that special relationship with the child, but they are also testing to see if this child will keep secrets. And if the child can keep a secret about something that's somewhat innocuous, then the person knows that they can continue to manipulate this child and gradually further erode the child's boundaries. And if in fact uh, the person gives the child a cell phone and the child goes running to their caregiver and says, hey, look what Uncle Louis gave me, um, then Uncle Louis knows this is not a child who I can manipulate, and and this is not a child that I am going to continue to work to develop a relationship where I might be able to harm the child. If the child keeps the secret, the person may also work to drive a wedge between the child and their caregiver. Often that's by giving the giving the child a very understanding and sympathetic ear. So, children complain about their caregivers. That's just a fact. Some children do more, some children do less. But uh, most caregivers, if they're setting boundaries, their children are going to be somewhat unhappy with that. They're going to complain. If a child is complaining to the person who's working to manipulate them, is complaining about what their parents do, the person is like, say, oh, I'm so sorry. That is, your parents are really missing the mark with that. And will again begin to drive that wedge. You can talk to me about this stuff. Don't talk to your caregivers about it. Um, they may do sort of, I'm going to offer you some jobs and you can earn some extra money. Those are all things that might happen. All of that in the engagement phase, there is no, to that point, at least in the engagement phase, there is no um, physical boundary crossing. However, eventually in that engagement phase, the person might begin to push the child's boundaries. So a youth pastor who is uh, manipulating one of the children in their youth group might, again, if it's a high school kid, might um, accidentally swear in front of the child and then say, oh, I really shouldn't have done that. Please don't tell anyone or I'm going to get in trouble. Now the child is beginning to be allied with the adult, and is engaged in keeping those secrets. And then if that continues, and again, if the child does tell someone, hey, Pastor so and so swore, that's probably not something where the pastor is going to get uh, removed from ministry, but um, might get reprimanded a little bit, and could very easily say, oh, that was a mistake. I'm very sorry. That will not happen again. Again, that youth pastor has figured out this is not a child who is going to keep secrets. This is not a child that I can manipulate. If the child does keep a secret, might move on to offering alcohol, um, or doing something that might be a little illegal. I'm thinking alcohol just because children under the age of 18 aren't legally allowed to drink. And so then the adult could say, if you tell, I'm going to get in trouble and you're going to get in trouble. In fact, we are going to get in trouble. And now suddenly the person who's looking to do harm has kind of co-opted the child into this whole process. And we could get in trouble if word gets out. Now the child is beginning to think, oh, I can't tell because I'm doing something wrong. And that's frequently uh, what a person looking to harm a child will do, is move so that the child thinks they're also on the hook for the behaviors. They may say something, they may eventually start touching and gradually make it more and more of a sexual touch. They may kiss, but that often happens towards the end of this manipulative process. So all of what I've talked about, when you look at it, I, I'm I'm not wanting to instill fear. I think it's really important to say, you know what? Most adults never look to sexually harm a child. Most adults do not. What for me is somewhat alarming is these behaviors. When I look at that list, many of them are behaviors that I might engage with a child. I I want children to feel special. I hope we all think that children deserve to feel special. Um, I may praise a child for their accomplishments and the things that they're doing. I may praise a child for their maturity. I, uh, my congregation had a church retreat this weekend, and in fact, I was praising some of the children, some of our youth who were really mature, and on Saturday were helping to serve the noon meal, and they did a fabulous job. They deserve to get that. I think children deserve an understanding and sympathetic ear. Um, there are times where I might want to hire a student to do some odd jobs. So many of these manipulative behaviors that could be manipulation might also be healthy interaction. However, and I don't think I can stress this enough, manipulation does not look like healthy adult interaction. So when I on Saturday was praising our youth for how mature they were as they were uh, serving other people in our congregation lunch, I don't think that should have raised alarm for anybody. If it is manipulative behavior, almost always someone who is observing that behavior will get just that twinge in their gut that says, oh, there's just something a little bit off about that behavior. Sometimes the manipulation is very clearly it's violating, some congregational rules. And then that's a little bit easier. But very often we just get some little red flags going up in our brains that says that there's something a little off with the behavior. For years and years and years, I think we as adults have been trained to ignore those gut feelings. And we do it for all kinds of really good reasons. We don't want to offend anybody. We don't want to judge. It's just really uncomfortable to confront someone about behavior that we think might be inappropriate. And so we will be quiet. We might think it's not my child. It's not my responsibility to intervene here. It's up to the parents to keep their kids safe. Um, Again, uh, what is a reality for me is this understanding that no, we all as adults have a responsibility to protect children, not 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 just my children, but all children that we have interaction with. So it is, in fact, our responsibility to step forward. So again, I think many people will say after an offense has occurred and has come to light, they will say, I always thought there was something a little bit off about Pastor Jane or about their coach, but they chose to ignore that feeling of something off. When I'm training through the Collins Center here in Harrisonburg, I will often tell people, if something is feeling off to you, pay attention, listen to your gut. That is the Holy Spirit speaking to you. It is worth listening to that. In in almost all cases, it is impossible to know for sure if what you are seeing is manipulative behavior that could lead to sexual abuse. You simply cannot tell by looking at it that it is behavior that's moving towards abuse. But it is behavior that is setting off feelings of discomfort for you. And my goodness, don't you want to intervene before it gets to a child being harmed? Because uh, I hear stories all the time from caregivers and others who are ridden with guilt once a child has been abused because they can look back with hindsight and say, yeah, here were some signs that I ignored. So we really do need to pay attention to those signs. This is where it gets uncomfortable, folks. Um, you're seeing behavior that's concerning, and now you're doing a little freak out on the inside about what do I do? Don't, this is where you have to be an adult. You have to be willing to step into that discomfort and 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 do something. And I'm going to at least try to suggest that what you can do is um, fairly simple, actually. Uh, you might be sweating, and that's okay. You might be feeling really shaky. That's okay. What you don't have to do is you don't have to accuse anyone of anything. All you need to do is have conversations with other adults, be clear about expectations, and hold each other accountable. So a really simple way of intervening when you see behavior that, you know, either A, violates some policies that your congregation might have, or that your organization might have, or that behavioral norms that your family has. When you observe what you think might be manipulative behavior, name it. And by name it, I don't mean, hey, I think you're manipulating this child. You need to stop. That's that is not the way to go with this. Name what you are observing. So if it is someone who is tickling a child and the child who may have been enjoying the tickling at first, but who is now like trying to get away or, is saying, stop, stop. Um, you can step in and say, hey, I see that little Johnny or little Janie is done with the tickling. Why don't we go and play a different game? So name what you see. You can highlight, little Janie is done with the tickling. I think it needs to stop. And then why don't we go and play checkers? Um, at no point are you accusing someone of doing something wrong. In fact, you're naming the behavior that you're picking up in the child. Or if the child is not expressing discomfort, but you're just uncomfortable with what you're hearing, you can say, you know, this conversation is making me uncomfortable. I think we're not going to have it. We're not going to have that conversation now. Let's go and do something else. Or, you can even say to the child, why don't you go and play with your friends? Whatever. Um, it is a skill that I think we have to develop in ourselves. Um, it is like any muscle. The only way it develops is if you use it, and it can grow. So I do think we need to be able to think a little bit about how we might work it, but don't overthink it. Keep it fairly simple. So I'm going to give a couple of examples. Um, I will say that any example is uh, imperfect, and there is just no way that I can address every possible scenario. But I do hope this helps you start to think about, okay, how might I intervene? So if we were in person, this is where I would break you up into small groups to talk about these things. Start with a family scenario. So you're at a family reunion and you overhear your adult brother talking to your other brother's or your other sister's daughter, his niece, and he's saying things like, your lips are so beautiful. Oh, do you like to kiss boys with those lips? I bet you have lots of boyfriends. On the face of it, that might be your brother teasing your niece, and uh, that could be innocuous. But is that an appropriate kind of conversation? Is that appropriate for an 8-year-old to be having that kind of talking to? I would like to suggest it's overly sexualizing this child, and it it at least makes me uncomfortable. So how would you intervene? What would you intervene? I guess is the first question. And then the follow-up would be, how would you do it? And you can think just a little bit about how you might do that. I have the advantage of having seen these multiple times before. So I've got some ideas that I'm happy to share. Um, First of all, it's not going to be very comfortable for me to talk to my brother and about this. My brother may be a great guy who just likes to tease kids. But if this is making me feel uncomfortable, then I owe it both to my brother to talk about it, but I also owe it to my 8-year-old niece. I want my niece to know, A, that that she shouldn't have to worry about what her lips look like or to be worrying about having boyfriends. Uh, I want her to know that I am concerned for her and I'm watching out for her. So I would probably say something like, "Hey, Larry, that conversation just is making me feel uncomfortable. I think we don't need to talk like that with our nieces. Jane, why don't you go and play with your cousins and we'll get together at lunch and talk more." I haven't accused my brother of anything. It may be that my brother just has some rather lousy uh, social boundaries, and maybe I've just helped him to understand that maybe that's not a great way to talk to a child. Um, it may be that my brother was thinking of offending on his niece, and now he knows that I'm watching out, and he's not going to be able to do that. My niece has learned that other people are watching and are helping to put some boundaries on. So she knows that she doesn't have to put up with that kind of behavior. She knows that if something is happening, I might be a person who's approachable and that she could come to and talk to about something. Um, those are the sort of the two reasons why I think it's important to do some kind of an intervention. So I don't know how my brother's going to respond to that. My brother may be angry and really rip into me. I have to be a big boy and be willing to have that happen. And I can say, I am sorry. I I just was not very comfortable with that. If you use statements like, "I'm not comfortable with that," again, you're not accusing anybody. You're stating how you're feeling and your comfort level. It's a little harder for someone to attack you for how you're feeling. It's certainly harder for them to get defensive about that. Whereas if you say, "You were being inappropriate there," then they might be more likely to get defensive and to want to attack back. So that's just sort of how I would at least think about approaching that situation. Second scenario, you walk into the bathroom at church. I'm assuming you happen to be a female in this scenario. You walk into the bathroom and you hear a 9-year-old girl saying to her mother, "I don't need your help to wipe. I can do it myself." And the mother responds, "I'm your mother. Be quiet and let me wipe you." Now, there's a lot of information that's not included in this scenario. So again, I don't know where your minds go when you read this, but here are a couple of things that I would say. First of all, there may be a really good reason why mom is helping this 9-year-old girl wipe herself. Maybe she's had a long history of urinary tract infections. Maybe there are some developmental delays, and this child actually does need help wiping. You don't know the background of that. Uh, I don't, it doesn't even say, you don't know if you have, I don't know if you have a relationship with this family. You might not know the mother and the girl very well. Um, so again, What would you do when you walk into the bathroom and hear this coming from a stall? Um, Spoiler alert, I don't think there's a right answer here. Um, you might, I'll just share some of the suggestions that people in other trainings that I've done have made. One suggestion that frequently comes up is to say, hey, can I help with anything? Is there anything that you all need? Um, again, you're not accusing anyone of anything. You're simply letting the mom and the girl know that you're there, you're hearing this, and maybe that will be enough to interrupt if there is a problem. Or the mother might be angry, saying, like, mind your own business. Um, at which point you can probably say, hey, I'm sorry, it just sounded like there was, it was a bit challenging, and I thought maybe I could be helpful. Um, my favorite answer was from someone who said, well, they wouldn't necessarily say anything to the mother and the girl. They would just start singing a hymn really loudly. Again, the point being to let the mom and the girl know that there's someone else present so that if there was inappropriate behavior happening, it would likely stop it. And then, if and when the mother and child come out, you might engage the mom in some conversation and be even sympathetic to her and say, hey, that sounded really challenging. What's happening? And just express concern. In this case, at the church, what I would suggest is afterwards, you might want to just have a quick word with one of your pastors to say, hey, just want you to know about a scenario that I stepped into. Um, you're not making any accusations. Uh, it might be that the pastor will say, yeah, we're aware of this. Mom's really frustrated. And that might trigger some pastoral care. And that would be a beautiful thing. But it might be that the pastor knows of some other concerns, and this will just tip the scales towards uh, a further intervention of some sort. You don't need to be responsible for any further intervention. Really, what you want to do is just interrupt that behavior. One of the things that I've heard over and over is that in almost all cases, there is some kind of a process, a manipulative process that a person engages in before sexually abusing a child. And on average, about 40 people will have witnessed something during that process that might have tipped them off that there was something going on. So between a potential harm doer and a child who might be harmed, there are 40 people who might have done something. The only way that this person is able to harm that child is if all 40 of those adults take a step back and allow that person to proceed to harm the child. All it takes is one person stepping forward and interrupting the process, and that might protect that child from harm. The amazing thing is that we all have that ability to be that one person who can interrupt and let things move forward. That is my hope for all of us, that we are going to be willing, not easy, not comfortable, to step forward and take that risk and do some interrupting. That's what I've got, Nancy.
Well, thank you, Ross, for all that you shared. I will lift up a few questions that were sent our way. Oh, sorry. Were sent our way earlier as some of you were registering. And so we'll talk about some of those. I don't think we've got any questions in the question and answer slot there, but if you want to quick give one question or so, that would be great. And we'll try to keep on top of that thing there. Yeah, there's no questions yet. So one question that came in Ross was, how should we treat one another when we interrupt potentially inappropriate behavior differently? Graces versus accountability. And you've answered some of that, but this is such heavy on our hearts a lot of times. Could you say even more about that?
Again, I think my underlying principle here is that people are worthy of respect and to hold their dignity. And so I just never want someone to feel like the appropriate way to intervene is by coming in, loaded for bear saying, hey, I think you're going to abuse this child and you need to stop right now. That is just, first of all, you don't know that. And it is making an accusation and is just not likely to be uh, particularly effective or well received. And if the child is present, is likely to frighten the child as well. And I just don't think that's the way to approach things. We don't we don't know what's the motivation of the person. We don't know what battles they're fighting. We don't know what their intent is. So uh, even when red flags have been raised, you can step forward and intervene and still work to protect the dignity of that adult that you're um, whose behavior you're interrupting. I think that's just really important.
Well, one question that might be a follow-up, and then I received another one here that I think goes along with this, but I wanted to add. So you're, yeah, we're not trying to shame anybody. We're just letting them know that we've noticed that might make them pause. Maybe sometimes I don't realize that they are moving in that direction of manipulation, but it calls them on it. At least would get us all a chance to step back and think about what I've just done. But what happens if you say all this nice, gentle stuff and then the person turns on you with such anger? What do you do then, or what does that tell you?
Again, at least I have no problem whatsoever with apologizing and saying, I'm sorry if I've offended you. But again, I would come back to, I was uncomfortable in this situation and felt like I just wanted to, you know, intervene a little bit. Um, you're not accusing the other person. Uh, You can always own your own discomfort and say that was, you know, I was just not feeling great about this and wanted, to make sure that the kid was also feeling okay about things.
Mhm. This might be something we might talk a little bit more when we do something on behaviors of sex offenders, because sometimes they can shout so loud to shut you down so that you'll back off,
Mhm.
and they can keep doing. One question that came in was, how do you move forward if other adults will not acknowledge when you have named a red flag behavior?
Um, well, there are a couple of things that I think about. One is it is possible that you were misinterpreted, that maybe you were wrong. It may be that what was a red flag for you was was more about you and your discomfort with certain things. Um, we can't, there's so much in life we can't control. I do not want anyone listening to this webinar to think that it is their sole responsibility to stop abuse. All you can do is name what feels wrong for you. Um, Own that, interrupt it in the moment. People may say you were wrong. Um, if you have done it with as much kindness and gentleness as you can, but also as directly as you can, then if others do not see it that way, you hopefully haven't harmed people by intervening. And and maybe you'll learn some things about how you were misinterpreting something. That's that's not a bad outcome. We can all stand to learn things. But I
Um,
also think if someone is pushing back against, you can be clear about this is what I was seeing and why it felt uncomfortable. And and again, it might be what you heard, it might be what you saw the adult doing, it might be how what you read in the child's body language. And of course, children, it would not be unusual for a child who has been taught uh, subliminally all their lives that they need to uh, respect adults and protect the feelings of adults. It would not be unusual for that 8-year-old niece to say, "Oh, it's okay, Uncle." What did I call him? Uncle Larry. Um, it was all right. They may make excuses for him. That doesn't mean that they weren't uncomfortable in the moment and that you weren't right in interrupting the behavior. Um, so really, it comes down to um, being willing to step forward and do the adult thing, no matter how uncomfortable, knowing that you can't control that final outcome. I do think I should say one thing that I have glossed over in this presentation, which is it's not just adults who harm children. Almost 50% of child sexual abuse is perpetrated by other children. So, you know, we're watching not just adult interactions with children, but children's interactions with children and stepping forward to intervene in the same way.
the one person, said if they see something, going on and they brought it up and the person backs, even if they push you back, sometimes I have found occasionally when somebody pushes back so hard against what you say you saw, yes, there's times we can be wrong, but there's times we can be right on with what we saw. And sometimes I have found that some people who push back the hardest, are really trying to cover up and trying to push you against the wall. And so then, so I brought up, say I've done an interaction with someone saying, what you just did, however you have said we should do it. But then I keep seeing it happen over and over again. Then what should I do?
I I, I think at that point, and I do want to say it is not unusual for other adults to want to minimize and deny that maybe something uncomfortable was happening. So, going back to that question about I said something and no one else saw it. Um, Please don't interpret what I was saying as, well, you should just roll over and let it be, because I do not think that's the case. Um, Unfortunately, in families and in institutions, there is a lot of uh, impetus to protect the status quo and to avoid conflict. And so there we many of us, maybe all of us, have a great capacity to ignore and to minimize. And when you see something that has raised flags, step forward, intervene, let if it's in a family, you might want to let your other siblings know about it because you might be surprised what other people have observed. And it's like, oh, I saw this too. If it's in a church or an organization, let some of the people who are in charge know. If if you talk to one person and they brush you off, you might want to think about, is there another person to whom I can speak to also make this known? Um, Again, where I think where the church has often got in trouble is things always funnel through one individual, and that one individual can make the decision about this is a problem or this is not a problem. And that's where we have done horrible things. So to step forward and get multiple people involved so it's not so easy to cover up is really important.
Well, and you had said earlier something, forget the number, that maybe when something's gone on, there might have been 40 people who maybe had witnessed pieces of that. And I have found that true in pastoral ministry where there was a situation and I noticed something, but it wasn't quite. And so I talked to my team and each of us had a piece of it. We finally put it together and go, aha. And so then we could move forward with what we needed to do. So I appreciate you saying that. I'm looking here to see, there's been,
And it might,
yeah,
Nancy, it might be that in a situation like that, if multiple people have seen concerning behaviors, that still doesn't mean that the person is moving towards abusing a child. But where you've seen multiple instances of questionable behavior, I think it may become quickly incumbent upon us, and by us I'm saying the church or a family, to put some boundaries around that person. You're not accusing them of of intent to harm, but you're saying, you know, you have been talking in inappropriate ways to your nieces and nephews, and we're just not going to have our nieces and nephews be around you unsupervised. Again, you can't say that the person was going to abuse, but you have now put in some stronger measures to protect. And that is what we have got to do. And it may mean saying you can no longer function as a youth sponsor. Um, that's not
that's
comfortable.
one of the questions that we got, that someone said they wish they would hear more about direct intervention. And I think sometimes churches do struggle. You see some things, the person has never been convicted. If they've been convicted, then that's one thing, but somehow we backpedal a little too much sometimes when the person hasn't been convicted, but there's been enough scenarios more than one time and enough people have seen it that there needs to be some direct intervention. What you're saying is that there's certain things that they won't be allowed to do, but to know as persons who are doing this, there's always going to be someone who's going to say, oh, you're just you're looking for the worst thing, or you know, they will try to yeah, get you to back off, even if it's other people besides the person who you've tried to do a gentle intervention with. So
Yeah, there are always going to be there are always going to be scenarios that no matter how well prepared you are,
mhm.
you're going to go, huh, I've never run into this. What do I do now?
Mhm.
Um, that's life. And then I would say ask for help.
Mhm.
Reach out, whether it's to others within your congregation or others within your family or organization. Reach out to Nancy at MCUSA. The Collins Center Child Advocacy Center website is in the chat. My email address is, I'm happy to put it in. I'm happy to to field questions. Um,
Mhm.
and sometimes there aren't great answers, but boy, if we're not struggling with it, we're doing a great disservice, both to children and to those who have lived experience with child sexual abuse, and we need to honor those voices too.
It's hard work, but it's the right thing to do, to struggle. And yes, it takes a lot of energy, but if you can stop someone, and it's helpful to the individual who's doing the harming too, in their best interest to stop them from doing more of, doing more of what they have been doing that is not God intended. Going to say
Right.
that very strongly. Ross, I want to thank you so much for being willing to share with us this evening. I thank everyone who has joined us for this webinar. And as we said earlier, the webinar, once it's recorded, it does go up on our website, so you can listen to it again, or you can share it with your leaders. We do hope to have some other webinar coming up in October that will be about what does a church do if a sex offender wants to attend. That is sort of in development. We will have a number of other webinars, and these webinars are all built on the kinds of questions and concerns that our office receives time and again. And so then we build our webinars around that. So I want to thank everyone who is here. And I do want to offer you blessing in what you are doing. Thank you for caring deeply, for trying to make a safe space within the church. We as a whole church can do better, but we are making some movement. And so keep on doing your good work and know that you are not alone. So blessings to you, and go in peace. Good night.